Hi, and welcome to our Suicide Prevention Night. I'm Jim Lewis. I'm the care pastor at Inland Hills Church. I really appreciate you being here tonight. This is a really hard subject, but it's an important one. Suicide rates are increasing in alarming numbers, and we need to be ready to help those that we love. And so that's what this night's all about. We want to give you very practical information of how to talk to people about suicide, how to talk to loved ones if you believe that they may be suicidal. So this is going to be practical and helpful for you. Our presentation tonight will be led by Mike and Mari. They are the founders of Circles of Hope. Circles of Hope is a mental health caregiver group that is meant to give you skills, information, and support to help you if you have a loved one with mental health challenges or mental illness. It's really a valuable group, and we would encourage you, if that's you, to join us in that group. We also have an anxiety and depression group. If that is something that you deal with in your own life, we have a group that can be helpful to you in that. And those are both done from a Christian and a biblical perspective. Tonight we have some resources for you. They'll be on our website, inlandhillschurch.com. We'll have our card, our suicide prevention card. We'll have a list of therapists in the area if you need that. We also have an interactive format as you listen. You can chat with us online. So we'll have people available if you have questions, if you want to talk about some of the information, we'll have that all ready for you. So we encourage you to come online and as you hear the presentation to also talk with us as well. I'd like to start with a word of prayer and then we'll begin the presentation. Dear Jesus, I pray that this will be a life-changing night, that the information that people have will save lives, that they will have a new boldness and a readiness to help those that they come in contact with, loved ones in their own household or friends or neighbors, be able to ask the questions to help them deal with suicidal thoughts that they might have or difficulties they have in their life. So, God, we ask that you would be here and bless this time. Let it be helpful and encouraging, and most of all, give us the tools that will help us moving forward. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Welcome. Mike and I are so glad that you are here tonight to learn how to help prevent suicide. We know that this can be a scary topic. Sometimes we want to avoid it altogether. However, to keep the people safe that we know, we must learn how to have these difficult conversations. We have no doubt by knowing what to look for and what steps to take, you can help prevent suicide. Things are a little different right now with the pandemic. Suicide has always been hard to predict, but now it's even harder with COVID-19. We must find new ways to connect with other people, and we must keep looking out for each other. Physical distancing does not have to mean socially disconnecting. It's really important that we are checking in with each other. Tonight we're going to learn the risk factors, the warning signs, and 5 steps to help prevent suicide. By the end of the night, we believe that you will be empowered to have a conversation with someone about suicide. But before we get started, I want to address 3 groups that might be here tonight. Maybe you're sitting here listening and you have a heavy heart. You've lost someone to suicide. It may be increasingly difficult to listen to the talk tonight. You may doubt everything you did or that you didn't do. But please know, this is not your fault. Although these action steps are supported by evidence in the field of suicide prevention, they are not foolproof. We may have another group that's here tonight too. Maybe you have a loved one with mental illness. Maybe you're never far from suicide. You worry, you're concerned, but at this time you need to be sure that you are in contact with many other providers. You need to have a team of people that can help you assess their suicidality. Don't do this alone. However, maybe you are sitting here tonight and you're having your own thoughts of suicide. Please hit the pause button right now and call the 1-800-273-8255. 8255. There is somebody there waiting to take your call. 8255. There is somebody there waiting to take your call. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. 8255. Your life matters to God, and it matters to us here at Inland Hills. Please do not hesitate to share your pain. Let's all pause just for a minute so we can get that number. It's actually a great idea if you pull out your phone, if it's available, and put this into your contacts. That way you will have it available to send to somebody or to call yourself. I think many of you are probably uncomfortable talking about suicide. We worry. Are we going to say the wrong thing? Are we going to make the situation worse? We think, but I'm not a professional. How on earth could I help? Mike and I are not professionals in the realm of degrees. However, we have been walking down this road for 15 years with mental illness. And we want you to know that tonight's message is not solely about mental illness. We all need to hear this message. This message is for everyone. If God puts somebody in your life, there is a reason. And I want you to ponder with me for a minute. Who are the people that are most likely to come in contact with somebody that is having suicidal thoughts? They're people like you and me. We must be brave. We must have these conversations. However, I also want you to know there is a fine line between what we can do and what a professional can do. We need to make sure that we stay in our lane. We can get them, we can start the communication, and we can get them to help, but we need professionals to actually assess whether they are genuinely suicidal.
Okay, my name is Mike. I'm Mari's husband. And I just want to, before I have some numbers I want to give you folks about percentage of people who take their own life in this country and what's going on. But before I do that, I want to give you a quick story, because you're probably sitting there thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me, and I'm sitting here because my wife asked me to be here, and blah, blah, blah. But I'm here to tell you it does apply to you. And it isn't all about mental health. Just because somebody has a mental health issue, that's not the guarantee that they're going to take their own life. But only 40%, or out of 100%, 40% of the people who do take their own life do not have a mental illness. So, but my quick story that I promised you was, like Mari had mentioned, we've been dealing with mental illness in our family for a long, long time. And I feel as if I've taken a lot of courses and done a lot of training, and I've learned DBT and CBT and all these fancy smancy mental health issues. And but one thing I didn't really think about, I didn't really think about suicide. I really didn't. I kind of have a positive attitude. I don't believe anybody's ever going to take their life. It's just so hard for me to understand why somebody would take their life. I always said, well, if things got that bad, I'd just disappear and go up to the mountains and live a nice life pumping gas. But a few years back, my brother-in-law took his own life a few years back. And when he did, the crazy thing about it all is I was at a conference on mental health, a national conference on learning more tricks of the trade of how to take care of people with mental health. And I get a phone call and from my hysterical sister saying her husband had taken his life and she had found him. And what a kick in the gut for the family, but what a smack in my face. I knew my brother-in-law. Some people like their brother-in-laws. I happen to like my brother-in-law. He was a good guy. He had his issues, and there were warning signs, and there were risk factors. But I never learned the warning signs and risk factors like you guys are going to learn tonight. It's really not that hard. So I just want you to know that just pay attention to these things, and it's not that hard, and we're going to teach you how to do it. And these aren't, so you can make an impact in somebody's life and somebody's family. But I want to give you some stats, because I like stats. About 48,000 people take their own life by suicide every year. And it has grown since 1999. The suicide rate has increased, not decreased. It's increased over 10%. And it continues to increase every year. Although there's been a lot of work to try to reduce the rate of suicide, it just continues to climb. But not only are we talking about suicide, there have been 1.4 million suicide attempts each year in the United States. And so the potential is even worse than that. Suicide is the top 10, number 10 killer in the United States. So it is a real problem. It's a real problem that will affect all of us, probably, unfortunately. So right now, I want to show a quick video which would be a little bit more eloquent than the way I just described it to you, that discusses suicide.
If you've been affected by suicide, you're not alone. Suicide is a leading cause of death that affects millions each year. In most cases, it happens when stressful life events overload the coping abilities of someone suffering from a mental health condition. And the most common condition associated with suicide is depression, an illness that goes undiagnosed or untreated far too often. But the research is clear. Suicide is preventable if we work together. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has set a bold goal to reduce the annual suicide rate 20% by 2025. We can save tens of thousands of lives, but we need the help of everyday heroes like you. People have suffered in silence for too long, and too many families have had to weather their losses alone. You can change that. We need you to be the voice for suicide prevention, and it can be as simple as reaching out to a friend, because talk saves lives. If you're having thoughts of suicide, or if you're concerned about someone else, assume you are the only one who will reach out. You can also join hundreds of thousands across the country for our Out of the Darkness community walks, and raise awareness of suicide within your community. Together, we'll bring hope to those affected by suicide, and raise awareness to save lives. Learn how you can fight suicide. Visit afsp.org today.
So tonight we want to talk about risk factors. Risk factors and warning signs are two keys, and then we're, like Mari talked about earlier, and then we're going to give you the 5 ways to do it. And again, I don't think we've told you this or not, but these are not our 5 ways. These are trained professionals who have come up with these 5 ways. So risk factors are characteristics of a person's life that you need to be aware of. They don't mean because a person exhibits or has these risk factors that they're automatically 100% sure going to take their own life. But these are factors that you need to take into consideration when you're sizing somebody up, when they're telling you a lot of doom and gloom, and you've noticed other warning signs that Mari's going to get into. You think you need to go back to the risk factors. So here are the risk factors. Family history. If the person you're talking with, or one of your loved ones, or your acquaintance, it doesn't have to be, it can be as simple as an acquaintance, lost a parent to suicide as a child or as a teen, they are 3 times more likely to die by suicide than folks without that happening. Substance abuse. Depression and mood disorders are the #1 risk factor. However, alcohol and drug abuse are a close second. People with substance abuse are about 6 times more likely to die from suicide than the general population. Access to guns. This is an easy one and a big one. In 2013, guns were used in 52% of all suicides. It's actually 51.5, but we're going to round to 52%. So if they don't have access to a gun, so if they do have access to a gun, that's a risk factor. Serious or chronic mental illness. So this is what I was talking about a few minutes ago. 60% of the suicides, it is estimated, the folks had mental illness. So that's where I talked about 40% of the people who take their own life have no form of mental illness, while 60% do. Gender. Males are four more likely to die by suicide. But interesting enough, females try to take their own life 3 times more than males. And so males are using guns, females are not. It's kind of morbid, but you can understand what's going on there. And in history of trauma or abuse, if they've had a trauma or abuse in their life, that is a risk factor for suicide. Prolonged stress is another risk factor of suicide. So if you know somebody who's been under stress for years, that's a risk factor. Isolation. We're going to talk about that again later in the evening, but isolation and loneliness is an indicator of a risk factor for suicide. Age. People between the ages of 14 and 45 have a higher risk factor of taking their own life. Recent tragedy or loss. I believe I talked about that earlier, but if you've had tragedy in your life or a loss, you're increased risk of taking your own life. Unfortunately, last night I was watching the news, and a newscaster from Texas lost her son 2 years ago to suicide, and unfortunately she took her own life after being an advocate to help prevent suicide and trying to increase social awareness. She couldn't take it anymore, and she took her own life. So that tragedy was obviously a risk factor for her. And then agitation and sleep. Sleep is, as we all know, super important to ourselves and our health. And if they're not getting sleep, if they're severely agitated, this is a risk factor of suicide as well. So I believe that's all the risk factors. Mari?
Now let's move into the warning signs. So with physical distancing, this can be a little tricky. We're going to have to look a little bit harder. So let's just kind of go right down the list, and I'll add a little bit of input for you. So this would be one that we might want to look at with COVID. Are there changes in calls, texts, and online posting? Because you may not be seeing this person, so what's changed? What's different? Are they returning your calls? Are they failing to return your calls? Are they posting at weird hours? Did they quit posting and they regularly posted? So what you're looking for are changes. Then you want to look to see, are they talking about wanting to die? That is a warning sign. Is there increased alcohol and drug use? How about aggressive or reckless behavior? And if they're isolating, again, this is hard to know because of all the social distancing, but have they quit connecting with people? You know what, I'm just going to jump back up about talking about wanting to die, because there's 2 ways that people might be talking about this. They might talk about it in a direct way where they say, I want to die, I no longer want to live. But what's more likely to happen is they're going to talk about it in an indirect way, and you're going to have to be listening carefully. They might say something like, I'm just tired of living. I'm just tired of this pain. Those are the things that you're going to want to listen for. Let's go on to some more warning signs. Any increased anxiety or agitation? Extreme or sudden mood swings? Again, remember, these are just warning signs. If they're feeling hopeless, trapped, desperate, or like a burden. And again, this is probably one that you're going to have to listen for. It's not going to be communicated clearly. Are there changes in their sleep pattern? Are they up all night, or are they sleeping all the time? Those, again, are things to look for. And another big one is if they're giving away their possessions. So now as you guys look at these warning signs, you might think, well, gosh, I feel those sometimes. Yes, we all do. Remember, we're just putting a picture together. At this point, we're not assessing whether they are suicidal. We're just trying to gather information.
Okay, so let's talk about the 5 action steps. Mari and I just went over the risk factors and the warning signs, but there are 5 action steps that we're going to teach you tonight, and briefly I just want to discuss them before we go into the details. I want you to understand that these are not our 5 action steps. These 5 action steps come from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and these are trained professionals who have been working in this field for years, and they have come up with these 5 action steps. But I also want you to understand that really to do this is not that hard. You just have to get over the stigma of talking about suicide. It's not like a real fun conversation. So a lot of people don't even like to talk about suicide. That's how I used to be. So you got to get over that stigma, and that's just my tip for the day. The other thing, the reason people don't like to talk about suicide, they go, well, if I start talking about suicide to them, that's going to put the idea in their head, and then they are going to be suicidal and possibly take their own life. So if I don't say anything about suicide, I won't put that thought in their mind. Well, they've done studies and tests, and that's just not true. You cannot put the thought into their head. So the 5 action steps, without further ado, are...
So what we want to know, is someone we know thinking about suicide? Well, how are we ever going to know if we don't ask? So step number 1 is ask. And you want to do this directly. Be brave and be blunt. You don't want to beat around the bush here. So you want to say, are you thinking about ending your life? Whatever you do, don't ask in a condescending way that says, hey, you're not thinking about doing something crazy, are you? Or you're not thinking about hurting yourself. That's not a very clear way. So be brave, be blunt, and ask the question. You can use your own words, but you want to make sure that you're clearly asking the question. Not only is asking critical, but listening is essential. Listening is part of the ask. You're listening for information, you're listening for how they're feeling, you're listening for all kinds of things, and we're going to keep mentioning that as we go along. Next, you want to find out, what is their reason for living? Now, this can't be your reason for living. It has to be their reason. I know you may think of a million reasons why your loved one needs to keep living, but it has to be theirs. What's going to keep them wanting to live? And really important, at this stage, we do not agree to keep any secrets. That's just off the table. And this is a place where you're going to want to use I statements. You want to say, I care too much about you. I can't live without you. I need you. So you want to use I statements in this place, but you definitely tell them, I will not keep a secret if they ask you. Mike, why do we need to ask?
Well, the reason we need to ask is it's important. Earlier I talked a little bit about people think that if you ask, you're going to put the thought of suicide into their mind. And we talked about how that's not true. So the reason we ask is it gets the conversation going, it gets it out there, and it starts the process to find out how or if you need to help this person prevent suicide with them. So that was number 1, ask. What's number 2, Mari?
So step number 2 is keep them safe. So at this stage, you don't want to quit. You've already asked the critical question, but now we must keep this person safe. You've got to think of safety first. You may feel like they're going to be angry with you or that you're intruding. It doesn't matter. This is not the time to worry about that. I remember a time once when I was trying to keep somebody safe. I was consumed with losing the relationship. And I had a good friend, and she looked at me and she said, let's go there. So we went there. She said, what if they are? What if they hate you the rest of their life? But wouldn't they still be alive? I realized that was best. So safety first, every time. Next is really important. We want to do the timing, the details, and the access. Ask, do you know how you would end your life? When were you thinking about doing this? And do you have the means to complete it? You've already asked them in step 1, so you know that you need to keep them safe. So it's really, really important to search for the details. If they have any lethal means whatsoever, you want to make sure that those are not in the house. You might even ask, would it be okay if we took it out of the house? If you know they have a gun, take it out. But there's also another really important part here. You need to ask, have you already done something? Maybe they've taken some pills. At this point, it's going to be imperative to try to figure out what they took. You might even want to find out when was the last time they ate, because by the time you get to the hospital, they may be out and not be able to answer any questions. Also, grab that pill bottle if you can and take it with you. I want to remind you that you can call the Lifeline. You can call with them. This might be a great time for you both to pick up the call and make that phone call. Also, if you're many, many miles away, especially with COVID, this has kind of happened, you can call authorities to do a well check. Also, you can go straight to the ER. Remember, it's your decision. You do not want to leave them alone. If your gut is telling you not to leave them alone, don't. Trust your gut instinct. Even if they're angry with you, it's important that you stay and you keep them safe. There's a couple things, though, that you might need to know. Let's talk about the HIPAA laws. Many people know that there's not reciprocal. If your loved one hasn't signed a form, you cannot gain information from the doctors or the treatment team. But it's really, really important for you to know that you can always give information. So I remember one night, I was all alone sitting in the ER room, in the waiting room, unable to go back with my loved one because I was blocked. It is so, so important. I sat there. I was tired. I was lonely. I was scared. But I stayed. I stayed there, waiting for that person to come to give them a psych evaluation. When they arrived, I politely but firmly said, I have information for you. I know that you cannot give me information. And I proceeded to hand them a file full of information, medicine, history, and what was currently going on. I also verbally told them it makes a difference. It's really important. Know the HIPAA laws. Also, a couple little other tips are, when was the last time they ate? Maybe you could give them something to eat. If you give them food rich in protein, that's a huge help. Distraction is also another great way to help in the moment. But remember, just like a stove, when you turn it off, it is still hot. They still need to get help, but you're just getting through this moment. Do what it takes to keep them safe. Mike, why do we need to keep them safe?
Okay, keeping someone safe is super important because of the thought of taking their own life. Will pass. It's not going to be that thought in their brain of taking their life is not going to be on 24/7, 365 days a year. It comes and it goes. And so if you can keep them safe in the moment and get them help, this is a key factor. You could prevent someone from taking their own life. Mari, number 3.
So step number 3 is be there. What do you want when you're hurting? Don't you just want someone to be with you? You want them to be there and not try to fix it. I know it is super hard to sit with someone in their pain, but it is so important to do that. And remember, being present doesn't actually have to you don't have to physically be there, but what you want to do is be there 100%. You want to listen with empathy and compassion and no judgments. Consistency and dependability are going to be crucial at this point. A hurting person's life feels unstable, and they do not need you adding to it. So you're going to want to reduce your own emotional reaction, because people tend to react to emotion. So you want to keep yourself calm and cool and talk. Just have a conversation. And really important, anything you promise to do, you're going to do it. You're going to follow through with it. You don't want to promise something that you cannot keep. Mike, why do we want to be there?
Well, because your presence, quite honestly, can save a life. Remember, the thought of suicide is very intense at the moment, but it will pass. It may take an hour or two, but that moment of somebody wanting to take their own life will pass. And if you're with them during that time and can get them through that moment, whether it's 10 minutes or 4 hours of a moment, you can help prevent suicide. So that's why you need to be there. Mari?
So we are on step 4. The goal here is to connect them to people who can help. We may be able to lower the risk at the moment, but most likely it's going to return and they need some intervention. Make sure they have the Lifeline number, 1-800-273-8255. Again, if you didn't put it in your contacts, let's do it right now. Let's just pause for a moment and do that. So here's a good time to find out who's in their network. Are they already seen somebody? Do they have friends and family that can help? Because you absolutely don't want to call somebody that's not very helpful. Then you want to help them develop a safety plan. my3app.org is a great resource to prepare a safety plan. Of course, it's always better done with a clinician, but if you can't get them to a clinician, go ahead and figure out a safety plan. After all, let me ask you this. When you're in an emergency, can you remember your phone number? I certainly can't. Another great website is vibrant.org/safespace. There's all kinds of coping skills, resources, and things there that can help the person. Mike, why do we need to help connect?
Well, because think about that person who's thinking about suicide. If we don't help them connect, and we say, "Oh, here's the number. Good luck." The likelihood of them doing that is probably low. Just think of yourself. Are you really going to pick up the phone and dial this number on your own? Aren't you overwhelmed with other things going on? So just the act of helping them connect can help relieve some of the stress, and it also ensures that they take that step. I know you folks probably think that Mike's a super professional now after you've heard me talk for a little bit in this whole subject matter, but I'm going to let you down softly. I'm not a professional, and probably you're not a professional if you're watching this. So you want to help them connect with true professionals who know how to help people who are thinking of taking their own life. So that's why you definitely want to help them connect. You just don't want to give them the number and say, yeah, make sure you call that number now, because this will help if you do help them connect. Mari?
So we are on our very last step, and it is important too. You can't quit now. Your relationship is valuable to this person. Staying connected is going to make all the difference in the world. So what I want you to do is keep connecting and don't give up. This might also be a great time to go back and ask, hey, was there something I could have done differently in step 1 or 2? And don't be surprised if you hear, yes, if you could have talked less and just sat with me. That's usually a pretty good response. Remember, being with someone is so important. And this would be a good time to finish up anything that you said you would do that you didn't do. But keep connecting, keep sending those texts, keep calling, keep being there for that person. Let them know you matter to me. Mike, why do we want to follow up?
Well, staying connected will lower the risk of suicide for that individual. But it's probably, for me, probably the hardest step of following up. You know, we all get busy. We all, maybe the next couple of days you think, they probably weren't thinking of taking their own life, or you tend to minimize it. But following up is crucial to help them get better. And remember, way back we talked about loneliness and low self-esteem and things along those lines. Well, if you promise to do something to somebody who is thinking of taking their own life and you don't follow up, unfortunately, you're just driving home a point of loneliness and maybe they're not worthy. So it does put a lot of pressure on you. On these 5 steps, the 2 hardest ones for me are the first step and the last step. The first step, asking, that whole stigma thing. Oh, I don't want to bring up the word suicide. Oh, gosh, let's talk sports, something. Or the last step of why. And not why, but the follow-up. No, I'm not very good at follow-up, and sometimes I'm not very good at to-do lists, but it's super important that you follow up. It can help. So those are the 5 steps. So I want to recap them one more time for you. The 5 action steps. First, ask. Then you keep them safe. You be there. You help them connect, and then you follow up. It's almost like the 5-foot-long subway. It's easy. So you do those 5 steps, and you could help somebody save a life. You can help save a life. Not guaranteed, but you could try. Mari?
At this time, Jim's going to come up and we're going to practice. We're going to show you what it would look like. It's impromptu, it's not rehearsed, but what a conversation might look like in the first couple of steps.
Hey, Mari, how you doing?
I'm okay.
Well, it doesn't really sound like you're okay. What's happening?
Life's just been a little bit hard lately. All this COVID-19 and staying home, and I hate wearing a mask, and I lost my job.
Oh, wow, I'm so sorry. It must be really hard. Things are just very difficult right now, it sounds like.
They are.
Can I ask you a tough question? Have you thought of taking your own life?
I have.
Wow, that's got to be so hard. Can I ask you kind of a follow-up on that? Have you thought of how you might do it?
Well, I don't really think I would do it. But yeah, I know how.
Wow. Have you even got the materials to do it?
Definitely in my home. Okay. But I don't really think I'll do it. I'm probably fine.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, but hey, Mari, I'm really concerned about you and care about you. Would you mind if we went to your house and we took those things out of the house, and then we could call the Suicide Lifeline? I think that could be really helpful right now.
You mean I would call it or you would call it?
Well, I would have you call it, but I'll stand by with you and we can do it together.
All right, I would do that.
Okay, let's go ahead and go do that now.
Thank you.
So it's as simple as that, and you could even read it off a card, so don't feel like you have to memorize it, but the more resource you have, the better you'll be able to help somebody that you love.
One thing I just want to reiterate, when you ask someone that question, it doesn't offend them. It really doesn't. I had a conversation with someone this week who was not suicidal, and I asked that question, did I offend you? And they absolutely said no. And what they said was, no, I think you care about me. So that made a difference. But one more thing I want to be sure that we all know, anybody can call the suicide hotline. I can call it if I'm concerned about somebody. They will help me and they will walk me through it. I've called it a number of times to help me help someone else. So remember, anybody can call the suicide hotline. So you might be wondering, why was there little mention of God? After all, we are a church, and Circles of Hope is a faith-based group. Well, the reason is we wanted to take a simple message from Be the One to and deliver it. Anybody can use this message. It doesn't matter what your faith is, because we know that to God, every life matters. However, I want to tell you, don't think that God is not in every one of those steps for us. There's a verse that I cling to. Be still and know that I am God. Psalms 46:10. No, I'm not a professional in the field of suicide prevention. But when I hear that quiet voice inside that says, ask the question. I worry. I fret. My hands start to sweat and my heart starts to beat hard. I think, is that really God's voice? Or is that just worry taking over? But listen to that voice. Do not underestimate it. Listen for the prompting. God knows, even when it doesn't make sense to our human brains. I give God credit on more than one occasion. I have asked, I have acted, and I have stood my ground. I have obeyed when it made no sense to me. Some people might call that luck, instinct. I call it the Holy Spirit. As you might gather, we're a bit familiar with suicide. In our family, we've had to talk openly and honestly about suicide. We try our best. We don't always do it well, but we keep trying. Here's another verse that I cling to quite often that helps me when I need to ask that question. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Philippians 4:13. This may sound a little strange after a talk like this, but in reality, suicide could be part of our story at some point in our lives. We can't live in a 24/7 state of vigilance. However, if we get a yes in step 1 or we see the warning signs, we absolutely will do everything we can to keep a loved one safe. We may have been a little vague in our story. That was just to protect those that we love. But what you may not know, and what I'd like to share with you tonight, is I too had a suicide attempt. It doesn't always get that me too kind of feeling from suicide attempt survivors, so sometimes I hesitate to even bring it up. You see, I don't have a mental illness, and I don't carry thoughts of suicide. However, it was a one-time event. It can happen to anybody. I was emotionally depleted, and I did not know how to ask for help. Suicide and mental illness do not fit into a tidy little box. But what I do carry in common with other suicide attempt survivors is I carried that shame, that secrecy, and I was embarrassed. I didn't want anybody to know. And I want to tell you that no child, adult, or family needs to carry this alone. We need to be in this together. Silence adds to the stigma. We have got to start talking about suicide. If you have permission to tell your story or somebody else's story, please tell it. It helps. We've got to start talking about suicide. We cannot brush this topic under the rug. Every life is worth saving. I know God thinks so. After all, He sent His Son for each of us. Together with God, we can do hard things. Be brave. You might be the one to save a life, and every life is worth saving. Listen for God's whispers. Start talking to those you see struggling, and remember, God is with you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for wanting to make a difference in the lives of others. In just a minute, we're going to listen to a song, so don't go anywhere, and then Jim's going to come up and close us in prayer. I want you to remember, together, we will help prevent suicide. Thank you.
You know our sorrow, you lived our pain, you'll bring us joy again. When all seems hopeless, that's when you're closest. We hear you whispering that your love is stronger than our darkest fears, and you're with us in the night. You can hold our hearts and catch our falling tears, trade the dark
Although my story may be a little different, I didn't have the intent to want to die. However, I did still make an attempt. But what I want you to know is I hid that. I kept that private, and not even the clinicians talked to me about it. I kept that secret. So my entire life I spent wondering, would it happen again? Would I be strong enough? Was I not a good enough Christian? Why did it happen? I didn't understand. We have got to talk about suicide. Even in my family, we didn't talk about it. However, I did get the help I needed, and it carried me through some many trying challenges in my adult life. But together, let's start talking about suicide. We can help prevent suicide.
I want to thank you again for being here, and I'm praying that the information that you got today would be really life-changing for you. I'd like to pray and then just close with a few final words. Jesus, thank you again for each one that participated tonight. Ask that you give them boldness to ask those questions and to deal with their loved ones in not only a loving, caring way, but in a way that asks those difficult questions and saves lives. So be with them and their loved ones in all that they are doing moving forward. And just let there not be the stigma that we've had in the past, but let this be out in the light so that we can help more and more people. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, if you would like the slides from tonight's presentation, you can go to marid.com. Mari does a lot of speaking and writing. You can see some of her other things on her website. That's valuable. Remember also that we have downloads on our website. We have other support groups. If you just need help and want to call the church, you can ask for me. Glad to do whatever we can to help you in the most difficult times of your life. God bless you and good night.